Oh, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are dialing in from, and welcome to another Positive Partnerships webinar. My name is Chris Champion, and I'm based in Adelaide, and it's fantastic to see lots of names appearing in our registration box on the webinar. So nice to see people already accessing the text box. That's our main communication space for today, so please feel free to have a go and type away in there as we work through the webinar. And it's great to see some new people already talking about their first time, which is quite exciting for us as well. So we really hope you enjoy the experience. Without further ado, I'll pass you over to the wonderful Rebecca Sutherland, who is our facilitator for today, and Beck will give you a bit of a background about herself, and then yeah, we'll get into it. So I really hope you enjoy the experience. So thanks so much for joining us. So Beck, welcome.
Thanks, Chris. I'm really excited to have so many people online with us today. It's fantastic. I think we might be breaking some kind of records, and if we do, I'll be very, very happy. My name, as Chris said, is Rebecca, and I'm a speech pathologist. I'm based in Sydney, where it's a really beautiful sunny day today. I've worked for Positive Partnerships for a long time now, and I also work as a speech pathologist in diagnosing autism and working with children and families who are on the spectrum. And today we're really just going to be having a little bit of a talk about communication generally in autism and how that looks, and how some basic strategies that might be able to help you and your kids. You're all made it onto the webinar, which is fantastic. Congratulations. It's actually no mean feat. It's really a big deal to use this kind of technology, so welcome and well done. You can see that most of you will have already used the messaging tools, which is fantastic, and you're really, really welcome to use those to ask questions and to make comments. And in fact, I'll ask you a couple of times to make a comment or to give us some information and share a little bit about yourself. So you can see your name on the left in the upper box, and you can see the messages that you can scroll up and down in the lower box. And anything you write there, the whole group will be able to see, and we can answer your questions. And you can change your icon if you want to a little happy sound or happy face, and go from there. Freya's asking if anyone's having the sound cut out intermittently. Freya, it might be the computer. You can also use the phone line, which will be in the information. You can get on and dial into the phone. So that might be a little bit easier if people are having any problems. So do remember that you've got the two options there. It may also be my voice. I've caught a winter cold from holidaying school children, and I'm hoping to last the full hour. So let's see how we go. So our first bit of information is to ask, where have you dialed in from today? Chris is going to pop a poll up, so you'll be able to, I think by the magic of technology, a little poll might hop up, but if not, lots of people are popping in where they're coming from. So let us know your state would be the best thing, your state and or your city. And that's fantastic. Wow, you people are typing fast. We're up to 90 people now, so I hope that all of those are being recorded. You're from everywhere. This is fantastic. Okay, so the polls come up now. So thank you so much for all the people who've typed in where they're from. I can see regional towns. I can see main cities. Wow, Pinjarra, WA may win the award for most remote. Fantastic. So you should be able to see on your screen a poll. New South Wales is winning with about 21%. So as well as typing it into the box, just come and click on your state on the poll that you can see. So put your mouse on your little circle, and you should be able to do that. So New South Wales still ahead. We've got 18. Victoria's catching up. Oh, caught up. There they go. Fantastic. Northern Territory, there's just the one of you by the looks of things. Well done. Welcome to you. That's fabulous, everybody. Okay, so that's a really good spread. And just by looking at the towns you're from as well, I can see that we've got a really good mix. And some people obviously calling in from work, some people calling in from home, which is great. And thank you all for making the time, because it's no mean feat, I know, to find an hour in your days like this. Oh, so Chris is making the comment that this is the first time we've had every state and territory on board. Fantastic. Corrine, if Chris or Carmel or Emma could type to Corrine about how to go about getting onto the webinar, that would be fantastic. Okay, so moving on, we'll have a bit of a look at what we're doing. So we've got some intentions here about our session, but we'd also like you to have a think about yours. And just before we do that, could everybody just let us know how many people you have around your computer? So it might just be you. So if it's just you, just type 1. If you're there with a friend, that's 2 of you. If, as in some cases, you've got 6 or 7, fantastic. We just love to capture the numbers that we've actually got listening. So Joe S is winning with 6 people there in Derby, I think you were. Oh, 11. Someone's come up with 11. Fantastic, yeah. The 3-year-old and the 6-month-old probably not going to get counted in our numbers, but thanks for including them. Okay, fantastic. 9 from Narelle. Great. That's a big group. So those of you lucky enough to be in a group, you'll actually probably be able to do some discussion within yourself as well, and that might be quite useful. And for those of you, all by yourself, this is an opportunity for you to jot down some notes and to have a bit of a think about how this relates to you. So on the screen at the moment, you can see what I'm going to try and cover in the next hour, looking at particularly the skills and challenges in autism around communication, getting you to think about how your child communicates and what their particular challenges and skills are, the impact that those might have, and then a brief look at strategies that might help. Obviously, we're not going to cover every single thing that we've can do about autism, but hopefully you might walk away with an idea or a confirmation of what you're doing. Okay. So this is a chance for you to think about what's your intention. What would you need from this time? Is this just a really good hour to think and have some clear space to think about your child's skills and their needs? Is this a session that's going to lead into planning for your school? Is this something that you can contribute to your child's IEP or their planning session that's coming up? Have a think about that as we go through. Okay. Thanks to Vanessa and Carmel for letting our participants know how to get on. That's great. Okay, so let's start with what is communication as a bit of a background. I think it's something that we all take for granted, definitely, and it is absolutely essential. Often we think straight away about speech, and communication can involve speech and certainly is a very important part of communication, but it's not always dependent on it. What we really need to think about is whether what the communication is. Does it involve an exchange of information between 2 people? And that's the production of a message, the message itself, and the comprehension or the reception of that message. So while we are definitely and rightly focused on developing speech wherever it's possible, there are other options that might be appropriate for some of you listening in where your children aren't yet using speech to communicate, or where you are finding that other means to communicate are really useful as well. And I think that's really important to recognise and to encourage very strongly. Just as a bit of an overview, just when we're thinking about not necessarily using speech for communication, you can also think about what your preferred mode of communication is. And these days, we certainly have a huge range of communication options, from email to text to face-to-face to phone call. What's your preferred mode? Just type it into the text box and have a bit of a think about that. For me, it depends on my audience. Who am I talking to? If it's my boss early in the morning, I'm pretty happy with an email. If I want someone to answer me straight away, I want a text. And I don't know, it has to be pretty serious for me to go around and do a face-to-face message some days. Yeah, lots of different options there. And a big range of things, and I guess depending on what you prefer. Fantastic. And I guess this is really what we need to think about for our kids as well, when speech is difficult or when speech is well developed, but the situation is stressful or difficult, that our kids might want to use different strategies at different times. Kids might want to use different strategies at different times. So there's 2 main areas of communication that we need to think about, and any of you who've had, for example, a speech pathology language assessment for your kids, or if you're working in this sphere, you might have heard the terms expressive communication and receptive communication, and that's really an important concept just to begin with, because expressive communication is about sending a message, and receptive communication is about understanding a message. For children and adults who are typically developing, these two skills tend to develop at about the same rate and with about the same complexity. For some children who are on the spectrum, and those who aren't on the spectrum as well, might experience difficulties with expressive communication, so they may be able to understand what you say, but have difficulty formulating their own sentences or using the right words or coming up with a grammar or the sentence construction. For many children on the spectrum, their receptive communication or their understanding of a message may actually lag behind what they can say. And it's a very unusual thing, and it's fairly particular to ASD, to autism, where we see that the communication skills are stronger in sending the message and weaker in actually understanding and interpreting that message. And that's an important thing to remember. I think if I had $1 for every time somebody told me that a child understood absolutely everything they said, I would be extremely rich. What many children with ASD do is do extremely well in looking for visual cues and trying to make sense of the world as hard as they can, even when the receptive language can be a bit difficult for them. Okay, so as we go on today, what I will be introducing and suggesting that you have a think about is using the Positive Partnerships Planning Matrix. And this is one way of capturing information about a student that can help everyone involved to understand that student's characteristics, how they impact on the student, and strategies that might help. And we will refer to the matrix a little bit in this session, just to give you some ideas about how you might be able to complete the communication section in particular. So as we talk about the different areas of communication in autism, try to think about the most important characteristics that your child shows. It might be echolalia, it might be difficulty with receptive language, it might be their prosody or the way they use intonation in their voice or otherwise. And so what you can do is just jot down some of those characteristics that you notice that really chime with you, and have a think about what those characteristics might be, and have a think about how they might be impacting your student as you go through. And it might be that you actually think about some strategies as well that might pop into your mind as we go through. And Melissa's just saying that she's used the matrix with her son's teacher, and it's a fantastic tool. That's lovely feedback. And we agree, we find it can be really useful in those teacher-parent discussions where everything's on the page and everybody is therefore on the same page, like literally and figuratively. So we've got a very quick video here that I'm hoping will work as we go. Just as this opens up, Kareem, it's Chris. I'm pausing here to let Chris jump in and do what needs to be done here.
So, folks, I'm going to start this video. You might just, if you're listening through the phone, please mute your phone and turn up your computer. If you're listening through the computer, it should just work fine for you. Just so you can hear it play. It only goes for a minute or so. I'll just start it now.
Okay, I'm going to jump in and suggest that maybe... Oh, here we go. Enjoy. Okay, I don't think the video sound's working, so sorry about that one. Thank you to Suzanne for popping up the information about where to find the information about Positive Partnerships Planning Matrix. You'll find that on the Positive Partnerships website. So let's abandon the video. If you do have a time to go to the website, you'll find a whole online learning module about that there. Okay, is everyone able to hear me now? Okay, thanks, Jay. Thanks, Vicky. Okay, wonderful. Let's keep going. So you'll find on the website in the online learning session, and I'm sure that some of the Positive Partnership staff can pop that link up for you. There's some really great resources about creating the matrix, and I would certainly recommend that to you. Okay, so we'll move on to some of the communication challenges in autism, and we'll stop looking at our communication challenges around videos just now. Okay, so we know that students on the spectrum vary enormously in terms of their communication strengths and challenges. And so this slide just outlines some of the areas we're going to cover in this session. And we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. So as I said before, in most of these areas we're going to be talking about children who have developed speech, and but if your child or your student that you're working with hasn't developed speech or is working towards that, there'll be some other things we talk about towards the end as well about supporting communication more visually. So just to start with some information about receptive language. So there's different titles for receptive language. Sometimes it's called comprehension, sometimes it's called auditory processing. But in children with autism who are on the spectrum, it can be a particular area of difficulty even when their expressive communication is quite strong. We think that many children on the spectrum tend to learn language in a bit of a different way to typically developing children. They tend to learn it as a whole chunks of language, and so sometimes can use more sophisticated words and sentence structures than we would expect them to, and that are more sophisticated than what they can understand when we look at that in a more objective way. And that's true even for children who are fairly strong in their language skills or have good cognitive skills. We do still see that receptive language often lags somewhat behind expressive language, and it's very important that we need to remember this and keep it very much in our mind, particularly when the children are at school, because it can impact very much on how children behave or how students cope in the classroom. If they're working really, really hard to understand what's being said, or if they're needing to follow other children to try and figure out what they're meant to be doing, that can be, first of all, exhausting, and they can get it wrong. And that can lead to other complications as well. So we need to very much think carefully about what a child is actually understand, how many parts of an instruction they can understand at once, what kind of sentence structures they can understand, what kind of words they know, what kind of vocabulary they know. It's also important that we think about this in terms of reading comprehension. Language and reading are very intricately associated. If you're having trouble understanding what's being said to you, you may also have trouble comprehending what you're reading, even if you have good decoding skills. And I hope that makes sense to people. I'd be interested if you want to comment in the box whether that's something you've seen. Particularly true when we're looking at higher level language skills and understanding around inferencing and predicting what's going to happen both in spoken and written language. Some children prefer to read and comprehend what they read better because it's visual and it's stable and they can go back to it. But we do need to keep in mind those receptive language difficulties. So it might be that you actually might want to think about this a bit further, and if you do need more information, it may be worth seeing if you can have a speech pathology assessment or get a teacher to do a language screener for your child to see whether that's something that you need to have a think about. Okay, and then when we think about expressive language as a whole spectrum, I guess, as many things on the autism spectrum are, we know that expressive language can range from having very limited verbal skills and really requiring the support of other forms of communication, which might be pictures or signs or visuals or body language, through to children who are very articulate but have more subtle problems in those social communication areas or with very high level language skills. So we do need to think about that range. As with everything to do with autism, each child is very different, each child is unique, and we need to have a really close look at what they can do and what level of support they need to do to gain the next level of skill. So we'll have a bit of a look at the rules of communication, because this is one area that is often striking for children who are fairly verbal or who are using communication. And as a speech pathologist and as someone who's diagnosing autism all the time, probably the thing that stands out for me as a clinician as probably often the biggest thing that's going wrong for a student who ends up being on the spectrum. They can use language, they have language skills, but the rules around communication are very difficult and hard to understand. So if we start by looking at starting and maintaining conversations, what we see is that this can be quite difficult. So for some students on the spectrum, they might need quite explicit teaching around how to start a conversation, how to greet somebody, how to get a conversation going. I saw a little girl very recently who had a lot of interest in talking to people, wanted to talk to people, but the strategy that she'd learned was to ask somebody their name, which is very fine and was very, reasonably appropriate for her to do, but only the first time she meets somebody. And she's learned that that's a conversation starter, so she asks everybody what their name is, whether she knows them or not, and she asks everybody each time she sees them, even though she might know their name quite well. So something that often our kids need quite explicit teaching around. Similarly, they might need a bit more help and to be taught around how to maintain a conversation well. So some kids are fantastic at answering questions and are very good in a question-answer pattern of conversation, but may not have the skill to, or may not know that the rule is that when somebody's asked you a question, you answer, and then you might ask them a question in return to keep a conversation going, or you might make a comment that leads that person to make another comment or to ask another question. So that is often a skill that's really, I guess, showing a bit of a mismatch with language skills and might need some very direct teaching. Another rule that you might have experience of, and often parents will have a moment that sticks in their mind, and teachers may have that as well, where the child might need some more teaching around inappropriate versus appropriate conversation topics, and that might be knowing what's okay to discuss with grandma is quite different what you might say to your little brother or to another child at school. I think that many parents will have some thoughts around that, and an example of when that's been a very significant issue in their family's life. For other children, one of the rules they need to learn is around having a dialogue rather than a monologue in terms of conversation. And that means that just, again, knowing that a conversation is a two-way street. It's not just about how much information you can give out about Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever the topic of conversation is that day, but actually being able to make that a two-way street and a truly reciprocal communication situation. Carmel's just popped in an example. Her son used to talk about how he felt when asked, which wasn't always appropriate, yep. And telling people they were smelly. Yeah, I once had someone tell me in great detail that my breath smelled like onion. It was true. That was absolutely true, it did. But maybe not the right moment. And thanks so much for answering, Joe, about resources. We'll come to that what we can, and we'll follow that up with you. Okay, so another rule of conversation. So the types of conversation topics that are appropriate with different people, I think probably covered that a little bit. An important one that I'll cover a little bit further is understanding rules around abstract, figurative and colloquial language. So when is it okay to use colloquial language? When is it casual language okay? And what's the rule with that? When is figurative language required, and when is it definitely not required? And how to understand more abstract and figurative language as well. And so again, whereas a child who's developing typically really often wouldn't have this kind of confusion, a child who's on the spectrum might need explicit teaching and some rules around this, and to have that more carefully and more clearly explained than other kids. And this might be something that you jot down actually in terms of characteristics for your child, that actually this is something that does cause confusion or causes distress or causes problems in the family, or particularly problems at school, because I know we have lots of teachers on the line today, and I dare say you'd agree that honesty is not always what you want in a child at school, and we don't always, there's certain things that you don't say to the principal and that you don't say to your teacher, and that the child with autism, while they're not these things are true and they're honest, may not be the right thing to say at the right time and can cause them a lot of distress. Okay, and our final rule just in this section is thinking about the unspoken social rules and the hidden curriculum. Hidden curriculum is a really interesting area. It's not particularly about communication, but it's worth thinking about in terms of these social rules. And it's looking at the unspoken rules and the things that you learn at school that nobody actually teaches you. So things like Mr. Smith really likes the students to call him sir. He would never tell the students that, but everyone just figures that out after a few minutes in the class. Then there's more difficult areas and the unspoken rules around things like hugging. Who do you hug and where? And the rules are very fluid on that. You can hug your mum at home and you can hug your sister at home, but you probably wouldn't hug your sister at school. But if she was crying and someone was being mean to her, you might hug her. These things are quite tricky to navigate. And so for some children on the spectrum, we need to really make sure that they can learn all of these unspoken and hidden rules. If you are interested in this, Brenda Smith-Miles is the person to look up on Google. She's got resources and she's got her own webinars and is an engaging speaker to listen to. So it's Brenda Smith-Miles, and you'll see some things. She tells great stories about, what are the rules around using a urinal, and I'll leave it to your imagination. But the rules are complex and quite interesting to try and figure out for our kids who need that explicit teaching around all of these areas. Thanks, Vanessa, for answering Vicky's question there as well. Yeah, Brenda Smith-Miles. If you put that into Google, you'll find her. After this, of course, at 2 o'clock. Fabulous. Okay. So these are some of the rules. And what you can have a think about now, just as we move on to our next set of characteristics, is whether these are some of your child's strengths and difficulties, whether these are areas that you need more information about. Do you need to do some observations? Do you need to ask the teacher how the child's going at school? Teachers, do you need to start a conversation with the parents about, is this something that they see at home or is it specific to the situation? If anyone's got any examples, feel free, please, to pop them into the comment box as we go along as well. It's great to have people sharing their knowledge and their experiences. Excellent. Okay. I think echolalia is probably one of my favourite topics as a speech pathologist. I think that it's such an interesting area and it's been so misunderstood for a long time. Echolalia is the rote and often exact repetition of another person's speech and language. We see it sometimes imitated from the student's environment. So you might hear grandma's voice coming out, or you might hear the teacher admonishing the class when you get home. You might hear Dad's funny jokes and expressions that you can really hear is in maybe even Dad's tone of voice or in the teacher's accent. And I've had lots of interesting experiences around that where we found out exactly what was going on in a particular class because we could hear the child putting on the accent of the teacher as they the echolalia was showing what was happening in the class that day. We also hear it from TV shows and commercials and movies, and I'm sure that many of you will have examples. Sometimes when your children are younger, this might be the first type of language that you hear. You might hear a lot of echolalia being, coming out from Thomas the Tank Engine, or Frozen is a big one I see a lot now. I get a lot of wiggles in my assessments, and of course lots of parents saying, "Oh God, that's his uncle. He always says that to him," and that's fantastic. Benji's saying that she's got a 4-year-old who watched Hamlet. That's pretty impressive. I haven't heard a lot of echolalia of Shakespeare before. I love that. Echolalia used to be seen as a problem that required extinction. And I think this is why, it's a really interesting area still today. We now recognise that it is, for many children, part of their autism. It's part of the way they learn, and it reflects a different learning style to a child who's developing typically. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not something that needs to be extinguished. Research from the early 80s and from later, and even more recently, has shown that echolalia can be interactive, and it can be a way for a child to attempt to take turns, to participate in conversations to the best of their abilities. It can be used for requesting, and some of you may have examples where a child's actually used echolalia to request. It might be that they walk up to you and say, "Would you like a drink now?" And actually what they're saying is, "I'd like a drink now," because that's the phrase that they've heard used when they get a drink. And so they're using their echolalia quite functionally. For other children, it's affirmations. They might use their echolalia quite well to protest. They might pick up a particular way of saying no or distracting somebody from what they want to do by using their echolalia. So it's really important that we recognise it as a form of communication and that we recognise that it can be confusing for other people when they're encountering that echolalia for the first time, or that it might cause some confusion when the child's using their echolalia. But we need to recognise it as a very valid form of communication that for many children is a stage that they pass through. And I think this is what some newer research in the last 10 years or so has really shown that as children's receptive language improves, their echolalia decreases. So there seems to be a relationship between difficulties with receptive language, so understanding what's said to you, and using echolalia. And so the stronger the child's receptive language skills are, the less they tended to use echolalia. And this is from a really nice piece of research from Professor Jackie Roberts, who now heads up the Griffith Uni Autism Centre for Excellence. And it's Australian research done a few years ago now, but showed that relationship. And I think it's a really interesting one. The more that we can support our children to understand what's being said to them, and the stronger those skills become, the less likely they are to use echolalia. We also know that children tend to pass through stages of using immediate echolalia, so repeating exactly what they've just heard, through to using delayed echolalia, what they heard a while ago or from a movie or a TV show, through to what we call mitigated echolalia, where the echolalic phrases or sentences are changed a little bit in order to better meet the child's needs. And this really shows when a child's starting to use a lot more spontaneous language and just using a little bit of the echolalia to support some of those ideas that they haven't yet got spontaneous language for. So it's a very positive step when we start to hear young children using their echolalia, because we know that the speech system's working and they've got an idea about communication, and we need to make sure that the echolalia is not discouraged but actually used as functionally as we possibly can. All right, so there is a fact sheet on echolalia on the Positive Partnerships website as well if people are interested. And I'm going to stop being such a speech pathologist and get off my soapbox for a minute now, and we'll talk about a different topic. I like this slide. This has been put together for us by someone very clever. Can anyone guess what this is trying to depict? And has this sort of phrase been a problem for anybody's child or their student that they're working with at school? Yeah, raining cats and dogs. So I think, it's probably, not necessarily one that's taken terribly literally at times, although Vicky's saying, yep, someone hid under the table when that was said to them, it's raining cats and dogs outside. Yep, yeah. And other people have other examples. A good one is, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat today. And that can cause quite a lot of consternation for some children. But even things that we say all the time, we'll go in a minute. How many times a day do you think you say that as a parent or teacher? Just give me a minute. Actually, what you mean is, when you're ready, when I'm ready, which may be 1 minute, 30 seconds, or it might be 10 minutes when I've done everything I need to do. But, sorry, I'm laughing because I can see all of these fantastic sorry, lovely literal things that happen. I think the pants, ants in the pants are probably the best one. So take a look at those. And look, they're not always things that we say all the time, but it is important to think of it. So give me a hand. A colleague of mine said that in a childcare centre, and the child, she said, just looked absolutely appalled that the therapist was going to take her hand. Pull up your socks is a good one. And we just know that, to really understand non-literal language, the listener has to go beyond what's said and remember a figurative meaning from another situation and try and figure out what that means. So, really, typically developing children might have momentary confusion as well. It's not uncommon, but they will possibly remember that better and integrate that or they'll get the tone that it's being said in, or they'll tend to cope better. So children on the spectrum do tend to understand language much more literally. They might miss inferencing, they might miss all of those higher level functions, and they may not understand what's being said when this non-literal language is being used. And the same problems go for sarcasm and hyperbole and exaggeration that we all use. I think the one that Vicky's saying there, don't touch it, I'll chop your fingers off. Most children might look briefly at you and check your face and see whether you're joking and realise that their mum probably isn't going to chop their fingers off, or their teacher. I'm not sure which one you are there, Vicky. But a child on the spectrum may hear that literally, not look for other social cues, and therefore not understand it. And this is where the idea around reading speakers' intent is really hard as well. So a child, might hear the words that brown and orange striped suit looks great and take that as face value. Whereas actually if we listen to the tone of voice, if we listen to the, so if we look at the speaker's face and they're pulling a face and they've got a sarcastic tone of voice, we would understand that that wasn't to be taken literally, whereas a child on the spectrum may not. I think a great one is the old, what do you think you're doing? If you say that in a scary principal voice, as you're drawing on the wall, it has quite a different meaning to a child inquiring in a casual tone about what you're doing. And your answers are going to be, they should be different, but for a child on the spectrum, they may not be different. And look at the time, and that can have very different meanings for for a parent who's running late. Look at the time means get your bag, get in the car, quick, we're running late, we have to go. And another time it might be, oh, look at the time to do baking already, how fantastic. And so this is an area that our children get, I think, into trouble a bit with. I think this can be really hard for them and can set up problems with bullying, with friendships, and with getting into trouble at school and at home as well, because they're not reading that intent and they're not responding the way they need to. And I can see a few people are commenting on that this is an area that you're working hard on, and that this causes with kids, between kids as well as with authority figures. There are some resources around. If you Google it, or if you look at some of the autism-specific books and websites, there's some books around helping children understand non-literal language as well. Yeah, and I'd agree, it causes issues at school when teachers don't understand the extent to which a child is taking language literally or is not picking up on sarcasm or other, I guess, ways of communicating. And so this might be something you put on your matrix very strongly, that, doesn't get sarcasm, might be a really important thing for you to note there. And yeah, it's an area, it's a tricky one with other students because they can really take advantage. I think that can be an incredibly difficult area. Okay, it's worth mentioning prosody because it's often a really striking area for children on the spectrum as well. This talks about the music of speech, and that's the up and down, the intonation we use, the stress, the rhythm, the timing, the rate of our speech, the volume that we use. And for children on the spectrum, the prosody can be quite exaggerated, may be actually quite monotonous, or it could have a bit of a sing-song quality. And okay, I can see a really stressful note there from Chantel. That's really tricky, and I hope that you had some support to deal with that. Okay, so we'll move on to the prosody though. So prosody can really signal emotions and feelings, and it can really sorry, I'm just trying to put this really well for you. It can add a great deal of meaning to what we're saying, and we can both use prosody, and so I guess for many of our students we see that the use of prosody is different for many of our students we see that the use of prosody is different to other speakers. But we also pick up on prosody and understand it, and we know from research that the understanding of prosody is different for children on the spectrum as well. They don't necessarily pick up on the stress and the pausing and that intonation. So a good example that we'd all be very familiar with is that generally when we ask a question, our tone goes up. So if we said, would you like a drink? The tone goes up slightly, and we know that that's a question. Or, even if we make a statement, something like, shut the window, it's actually saying, would you mind shutting the window because I'm pretty cold in here? And we'd get that from the prosody as well as from the face. But it does impact on meaning a lot, and these are just a couple of little notes. There's a simple sentence here, I didn't say she stole the money. And if you have a look at the different ways you can stress and say the different words, it actually changes the meaning hugely. So if we say, I didn't say she stole the money, it means that someone else said it. If we say, I didn't say she stole the money, actually means I implied it. If I say, I didn't say she stole the money, I'm really saying that someone else did steal it. But, I didn't say she stole the money, but she might have hidden it. I didn't say she stole the money, but actually she stole the car, the house, and all the other contents. Okay, so you can see that prosody is not just about the musicality of your voice, which can make children on the spectrum, I guess, stand out. It's also about understanding a lot of meaning and really getting a lot of content from what we're saying as well. So it can be an area of difficulty, both using and understanding. Okay, I've got a query from Galia that there's no sound, but I'm assuming everyone else can hear okay. Otherwise, I'll stop talking. And it looks like everyone else has got sound. Hopefully that's an issue that's coming up. Great, thanks everybody. Okay, we'll just have a very quick look at developing literacy. I know there was a question earlier on about dysgraphia, which we're not really going to touch on today, but I think just a quick talk about literacy is important. For some students on the spectrum, and feel free to comment if this is the case for the student that you know, they may actually show what we call hyperlexia, which is a very precocious or early ability to decode words. And so I often hear about children who could read aloud at 2 or 3 and who could recognise words in the supermarket at a really early age. What we know about hyperlexia is that it may not always go hand in hand with a genuine comprehension of what they're reading. For some students, it does. We see very strong early developed reading skills, which are both decoding and understanding. But for other kids on the spectrum, it might be that they can decode and read the words, they can recognise the patterns and they can make sense of the letters, but they may actually not necessarily understand what they're saying. So we need to really see that amazing strength that some kids have in developing that decoding, but still support that development of true literacy around understanding what they're reading as well. For older students, we certainly see that students on the spectrum might need help in the same areas that they might need some support with their oral language around all this non-literal information that we've just been talking about. So that's inferencing, taking different people's perspectives, understanding what's not said. I know from some work in schools that I've seen that children are often taught about the hear, hidden and head way of understanding things. So they might, you can read what's actually on the page, and that's one level of information, but they're also needing to figure out what the writer's not saying, what's hidden in that text, what they have to actually infer, and then they have to think about what they have to get out of their own head and their own world knowledge to apply to that text as well. And that can be incredibly complex for kids who are on the spectrum where language is not necessarily their strength and they're having a lot of difficulty with that anyway. They may need some extra support in developing those higher level literacy skills too. Any thoughts or comments are very welcome there. Okay, so let's go back to the planning matrix now. Then have a look. This is your opportunity to have a think about what you would add to the characteristics, given what we've just talked about in this brief way about some of those challenges and those strengths that we see in kids on the spectrum. What are some of the what are some of the characteristics in communication that you might add? Then think about what impact they have. So we know that a child who's nonverbal, that's a characteristic, but think about the impact that might have and the strategy you might think about that. Or a child who's not picking up on sarcasm, that might be their characteristic. The impact is that they're vulnerable to perhaps bullying or getting things mixed up or getting into trouble at school. That might be the impact. So the characteristics of the impact should be fairly different and then we think about strategies. So here's an example now of a sample matrix. You might be able to see all that little writing, but just to give you an indication, if we look at pulling just one of those out, if we look at, one is that the child might have some receptive language difficulties, understanding 1- and 2-step instructions only. An impact of that might be that they miss a lot of what's going on in the classroom and playground. And a strategy might be that teachers and other adults need to really modify their language and use visual supports where it's possible. Hopefully that idea makes sense, but particularly around getting those characteristics and the impacts of those. And this is a great opportunity for those of you who can, whether schools are welcoming or for teachers where the parents are well involved, to actually do this as a team and to see if you can develop this as a group and then brainstorm some strategies together. It can be fantastic. Vicky, a matrix can be a fantastic addition to an IEP if that's a system that works for your school. That can be really a lovely way of capturing IEPs. I know can be very long and detailed and complex. A matrix might be a really fantastic way of capturing a lot of information on a single page so that everybody can read that. You can take that to Scouts, you can take it to soccer, you can take it to swimming, and you can give it to the relief teacher as well, so everybody's on board. So here's just a very quick look at some strategies, and we're just going to talk about, I guess, three main areas of strategies. One of them is visual supports. And I think a lot of people are pretty comfortable with visual supports or might feel that this is something that they know quite well, and I'm always really excited to hear that. Visual supports can be anything that you see that helps you to support your, particularly your receptive communication, and for some students to support their expressive communication as well. We've just recently done a survey of parents and teachers to ask which types of visuals are they using and which ones are the most useful for them. And the two that we've heard a lot about were schedules are really important, so that the children feel really well supported to understand what they're expected to do, which can help reduce anxiety, which can help reduce, I guess, dependence on adults and help with that building independent skills because they know what to do next. And the other one is just a really simple first then visual where you show your child, first we're doing maths and we're doing computer, or first we're doing homework and then we're eating ice cream, or now we're brushing teeth and then we're going to bed. And that can be quite helpful. So those are two main ones that teachers and parents are telling us about. These visuals are coming to a website near you soon, Narelle. We are just in the process of getting a really nice visuals library up. There's lots of ideas out on websites. I think we will, we'll have that up on the website soon. If that's something we can't access, Chris is actually just writing a post now. He might have some more information. Visual timers are a great support. So iPads and iPhones and other smart devices that are not necessarily branded are all fantastic and can have some great ideas. And I think my favourites on an iPad is a visual timer. It's probably the ones that you can't do easily on paper. And they show very clearly a countdown, and it's incredibly clear, incredibly visual. And it just shows the child and gives them time to prepare that one activity is finishing and we'll be starting another one soon. Yep, lots of people saying first then. Yeah, I love them too. I think that was my aha moment as a speech pathologist when I actually showed a child, first do this, then we're going to do that, and they got it. And I just thought this was a miracle. It's fantastic. Look, apps are great, and I think they're an important session, but, paper is fine. Paper and pictures, some visuals printed from, Google Images or hand-drawn pictures or a list for children who are able to read are just as good as apps for most kids. So obviously for some older kids, if you want them to carry that on their own devices, there's some apps that I'm sure all your parent and teacher colleagues on here will be able to recommend. But, a lot of the time it's hard to beat paper and pens and a bit of Google Images. So there's a lovely question from Sue about, do I suggest phasing out visuals? No, I don't. Only in the same way as I would suggest phasing out a wheelchair once a child's accessing the classroom well, or phasing out glasses once they can see the board. So I think visuals need to, once they're working, they're probably working because they're helpful And it doesn't necessarily mean the child's suddenly got the routine or can suddenly understand what's being said. I think it probably means that the visual is good for them and is helping. What we might do is gradually make visuals less obvious, perhaps for some kids. It might, they don't need a great big colourful thing on their desk that makes them stand out from the other kids. It might be that they can learn how to consult a timetable in their pocket, or a list that they keep in their wallet or in their phone. And so you can adapt them for sure, and you might gradually, move from using real photos when that level of understanding is needed through just words or just stick figures. But I think while a child's making good use of a visual, I wouldn't get rid of it. I'd look at, I'd look at what else would help to be visually supported. Yeah. So I think it's a really, really great question. And Jodie's making a great comment there that you stopped using them and guess what, put them back in. Yeah, so I think visuals in the classroom are fantastic. And it's surprising how many teachers in typical mainstream classrooms do use a lot of visual supports. A lot of classrooms now use timetables and use, what am I learning visuals, which are fantastic. There's lots of really good options there. So, Vicky's made a great one. You drew pictures and laminated them, blue tacked them on the wall. Yep, just so the child has a reminder of what to use. And I think for those of you both with children on the spectrum and with typically developing kids, nothing wrong with having a routine on the fridge that the child knows what they have to do in the morning to get out the door. Yeah, and Michelle's making that comment that they help a lot of other kids in the room as well, and absolutely right. So, in a lot of classrooms there'll be a child on the spectrum, but there'll also be 2 kids who are learning English as a second language. There'll be 3 kids whose oral language skills are really poor. There'll be a few kids whose skills are exceptional and they need to know what's coming up because they're actually anxious and need to know what they need to do next. Chris is being cheeky there. So I think you're making some fantastic points about visual supports there. And yeah, very happy to follow up on some of those. Okay, adjusting our language is probably the most useful thing we can do for many kids on the spectrum. We know from research and from clinical practice that receptive language is often an area of difficulty. So these are some of the things that can really help. And if you can share this with teachers, for the parents who are listening, this can be really great information to share with teachers as well as with people like grandma and auntie and babysitters and soccer coaches and swimming teachers, because these are the people who may not necessarily understand just how hard our kids are working to understand what's being said to them. So we need to keep our language direct. We need to say what we mean and mean what we say. We don't need to be flowery. We don't need to, make it all, all very nice and have lots of words. We need to actually just say what we mean so the child can understand what we're saying. We need to keep things simple. So we need to know where our child's level of understanding is. If they can understand one instruction at a time, we need to give them one instruction at a time and be very mindful of not going over that. Giving time to process is really important. A lot of children on the spectrum have slower processing speed than their other skills, and so it might actually take quite a bit of time for them to process what's being said to them. And I've watched children who we've said something to them in the morning and at recess they've responded to that question or comment because it's taken that long to process. Obviously that you can't give an hour for everything you say, but we certainly need to leave a bit more time for the child to process that before we jump in and repeat the question or the comment or the instruction, or before we expect them to do it. So just really, counting to 5 or counting to 10 after an instruction or after a question can be really helpful for the kids. Show and tell is great. So, yep, talking too fast. I couldn't agree more, Carrie Ann. Using show and tell, so using a picture, using an object, giving those other cues that the kids really can often pick up on better than the language. So if we're getting in the car, we hold up the keys. That's a very simple example. But, if we're looking at swimming lessons, maybe we get someone to demonstrate, not just tell the child what to do. They may actually benefit more from that. Carmel's saying videos are fantastic. Yep, absolutely. You can make there's really nice evidence for video modelling. So if you can make a video model of what you're expecting your child to do or the skill that they need to learn, that can be a great way for them to learn it. Okay, Melissa's making a really interesting point there that one of the boys won't leave the mat until everyone else has because he actually needs to wait and watch and see what he's meant to do. Yeah, it's perfectly valid. It can be hard for people to understand that though, and I imagine that at times the temptation to get him to hurry up, come on, stand up, let's go, come on, everyone's off now, go get your bag, get your hat, go outside, I was going to go and play, would be really tempting because that's what happens in the regular world. Avoiding sarcasm is important. We've talked about that already. So, there's lots of examples, I think, about, and I think it's a real, an Australian thing as well. We do use a lot of sarcasm and a lot of non-literal language in a perfectly friendly way and a perfectly, in a way that's well understood most of the time, but sometimes not for our kids on the spectrum. And just finally, not using questions as instructions. So that's the idea of saying, and to be honest, this has been something I've learnt very strongly in my marriage, where if I say to my husband, would you mind doing the dishes, darling? Tell me yes, he in fact does mind quite a bit, but he'll do the dishes. That's absolutely fine. And some of you might have found that with your kids, or in fact with your spouses as well. But this is something we do see a lot in kindy classes. Is a great example where the lovely, lovely kindy teacher will say, is everybody sitting up straight? And the child on the spectrum will interpret that in a literal way. And, might say, no, John's not sitting straight. He's still being naughty. And that's not helpful for anybody, really. So we talk about not using questions as instructions, even if it feels a bit more polite. Okay, and our social and conversation skills, we talked quite a bit through that many kids are going to need some more explicit teaching around that. There are resources around. There's, if you look for those sorry, Chris, it's always little Johnny. I'm also married to a John, so there you go. We know that there are some, so we've already talked about video modelling a little bit, and again, if you have a look for video modelling, you'll see some good resources about that and some information. Try to look for websites that are associated with, there's some good ones associated with Indiana University and some clues there. Often universities have got some good information about those and how to do that. Just looking at Carrie-Anne's comment too. Social scripts and social stories can be really quite useful. So social stories were developed by Carol Gray, and they explain a social situation so that the child knows the details of what's happening in a particular situation that they might not have noticed or understood. And it can tell the child how to respond to that social situation as well. So we write social stories for things like going to assembly or visiting grandma, or I've written social stories about going to funerals and what happens when somebody dies, so that the child can understand what's going on around them and they know what they can do as well. Joe, I can see your question there. I don't know what a conversation tran book is. Maybe there's a typo there. I'm happy to keep train. No, I don't. Sorry. That's a tricky question, Vicky. I think that's a really good specific question that I don't know whether I can get into just now about trying to give instructions when they're doing a monologue. I think that's something, it might be a bigger situation there about how do we, how many bits of information do we give, and do we make some rules around sharing information and stopping after a certain time, or when mum, makes this face, that means mum needs to tell you something or to give some information. And that might be a really great use of video modelling, or you might be able to use a social story to start to teach some of that. When mum puts up her hand, it's her turn to talk. So that might be one way to deal with that. But that's a big challenge, and we need to look at why the monologues are happening and how, the effect of stopping that, what level of anxiety would that cause versus how important is it to have a turn and to teach the child to do that, and when do we do that and how do we do that. So it's complex. All this is really complex, but I think if we can start by really understanding what those characteristics are and what impacts they have, then some of those will become a bit more clear in terms of strategies. Okay, it's right on 2 o'clock now, so Vicky, Jodie's put a nice little moment there. I think that sounds like a great strategy, Jodie, so I'll just let that sit there and read that. We're just on 2 o'clock now. I'm going to just point you towards some other resources we've got. There's communication information on the Positive Partnerships website. There's a fact sheet on echolalia that Vanessa has already popped into the comment box further up the comment stream. There's some information about communication functions from various sites that you can have a look at there. The Raising Children Network, if you're thinking about younger children, has got some really solid information about strategies and function as well. Here's our sites where you can connect with Positive Partnerships. If you go into the Positive Partnership sites, there's a lot of information. There's a range of different webinars that you can access. There's online learning modules. Everything's free. Everything's very easy to access. You should be able to find more information there about most topics that you're interested in. And similarly, our Facebook page will connect you with upcoming webinars, upcoming resources, surveys, information, research that we're sharing. So have a look at those at your leisure. Hopefully you'll find those useful and interesting. We have got some upcoming workshops, and given that we've got somebody in every single state, which is absolutely fantastic, there may be something for many of you in these different areas. So do feel free to pop onto the Positive Partnership site and have a look at what you might be able to access, might be coming up with you. Some of those are ones that are what we call co-located with a teacher workshop. So these are parent workshops, and some of them are being held at the same time as teacher workshops. Some of them, like the Nara one, is an information session, and so is the Caboolture one. They're just shorter little ones, and you can go on and have a look at those. But I'm going to stop talking because you've all done really well. We've taken the full hour. We have a survey for you. We would really, really love to get your feedback on this webinar because we use that feedback to improve what we do. And so anything that you have to say, anything that you think might be useful for us, please do feel free to let us know in our survey that we're going to send to you as well. So thank you all so much for attending today. It's been really wonderful to have all of your input, all of your comments, all of your feedback as we've gone through, and all the fantastic questions that you've had. It's been really lovely. My voice has held out for the whole hour, so I'm very excited. But we might let you get on with your day, and we'll look forward to sending you the emails, and we'll look for your survey response. And if there's any other questions, please do feel free to get in touch. And thank you very much.
Fantastic, Beck. Thanks so much. Folks, I'll also upload the webinar feedback link into the text box, so if you want to do it that way, you can as well. But it'll also come out post the webinar in the next couple of days. You'll get the PDF of the slides, you'll get the links that we've sent through, and also send around a couple of visual word examples of some visual support so you can modify and adapt them as you need them. So thank you so much for all your input today in the text box. It was amazing to see so many people interactive and helping each other out. So hope you have the rest of a great Monday, and we welcome you to join our face-to-face workshops if you get a chance, but certainly join us in future webinars. We'll continue to do these every month or so. Thanks so much. Ciao.